It is twilight in the southern desert of Iraq, and the wind moves slowly across a landscape that seems, at first glance, to be empty. The sky is fading from pale gold to deep violet, and the air is cooling after the fierce heat of the day. You stand on a low rise of earth, surrounded by flatness in every direction, and beneath your feet the ground is not quite level. There are mounds here, subtle disruptions in the smoothness of the plain, covered in pale dust and scattered with fragments of brick. The wind stirs the sand, and for a moment you can smell something ancient in the air, something older than memory. This place has a name, though it has been forgotten by most of the world for thousands of years. It is called Ur. Beneath these silent dunes lies one of humanity's first great cities, a sprawling metropolis that thrived when the pyramids of Egypt were still young, when writing itself was a new and revolutionary invention. Here in the flat lands between two rivers, civilization was born. Tonight you will journey back across 45 centuries, to a time when the world was smaller and stranger, when gods walked in the temples and kings claimed to rule by divine right. You will walk the streets of Ur at the height of its power, when its walls enclosed tens of thousands of souls, when its ziggurat rose like a mountain toward the heavens, when its markets hummed with the voices of merchants from distant lands. You will see how people lived and worked, how they worshipped and died, how they built a world that would shape all the worlds to come. So let the noise of the modern world fade away now. Let the hum of engines and the glow of screens dissolve into the gathering darkness. Close your eyes if you wish, and let yourself drift backward through time, across deserts and centuries, to a place where the first great experiment of urban life was unfolding, brick by brick, beneath an endless sky. The land where Ur would rise was not at first a place that seemed destined for greatness. It was a flat expanse of silt and clay, deposited over millennia by two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, as they wound their way southward from the mountains of Anatolia toward the Persian Gulf. This was southern Mesopotamia, a name that means simply the land between the rivers, and it was a landscape shaped entirely by water. Every spring, when the snows melted in the distant highlands, the rivers would swell and overflow their banks, spreading across the plain in broad sheets of brown water. When the floods receded, they left behind a layer of rich, dark silt, the gift of the mountains, thick with nutrients and perfect for growing crops. But this was also a landscape of extremes. The summers were brutal, with temperatures climbing well above 100 degrees, the air dry and crackling, the earth baking hard as stone. There were no forests here, no stone quarries, no metal ores. There was only mud, reeds, and the slow, patient rivers. And yet it was here, in this unpromising place, that some of the most important innovations in human history would emerge. The people who settled this land were called Sumerians, though we do not know what they called themselves, nor do we know for certain where they came from. They appear in the archaeological record around 4000 BCE, already skilled in the arts of irrigation and canal building. They understood that the rivers, though life-giving, were also unpredictable and dangerous. A flood could drown a village, a drought could starve it, and so the Sumerians began to reshape the land itself, digging long, straight channels to carry water from the rivers to the fields, building earthen levees to protect their settlements, creating a network of canals and ditches that transformed the desert into a garden. This was hard, collective labor, requiring coordination and planning, and it gave rise to the first forms of centralized authority, the first temple administrators who organized the digging crews and distributed the grain. The landscape of southern Mesopotamia, in those early centuries, was not the barren desert it is today. The marshlands near the confluence of the rivers were thick with reeds, some growing as tall as a man, their stalks rustling in the breeze. Date palms clustered along the canals, their heavy fruit hanging in clusters. There were fish in the rivers, waterfowl in the marshes, and in the fields, barley and emmer wheat grew in neat rows, their golden heads bending in the wind. The air smelled of wet earth and green growing things, and in the early morning, mist would rise from the water and drift across the plain like a living thing. It was in this fertile crescent, this narrow band of irrigated farmland, that the first villages began to grow into towns, and the towns into cities. And among those cities, Ur would become one of the greatest. By 2100 BCE, Ur had been inhabited for nearly 2,000 years. Generations had lived and died within its walls, each adding to the slow accumulation of mud brick and memory that formed the city's foundation. The settlement had grown organically, spreading outward from the sacred precinct at its heart, and now it was a true metropolis, home to perhaps 60 or 70,000 people, though exact numbers are impossible to know. Imagine yourself now on the long dusty road that leads to Ur from the north, walking in the company of merchants and farmers, your feet stirring up small clouds of pale dust. It is early morning, and the sun is just beginning to rise above the horizon, casting long shadows across the plain. In the distance you can see the walls of the city, massive ramparts of baked brick that seem to grow directly out of the earth. They are perhaps 30 feet high, thick enough to withstand a siege, and they run in a rough oval around the entire settlement, enclosing an area of more than 2 square miles. As you draw closer, the city begins to reveal itself in greater detail. The walls are not smooth but textured, built from thousands upon thousands of individual bricks, each one stamped with the name of the king who ordered its construction. You can see the main gate ahead, a broad archway flanked by watchtowers, and already there is a crowd gathering there. People waiting to enter the city with goods to sell or business to conduct. The air is thick with the smell of livestock, the acrid scent of dung being burned for fuel, and the faint sweetness of dates drying in the sun. You can hear the low murmur of conversation, the bleating of goats, the creak of wooden cart wheels. Guards stand at the gate, their bronze-tipped spears glinting in the morning light, but they are not aggressive. They nod to familiar faces, exchange a few words with the merchants, and wave most people through without inspection. This is a city built on trade, and the flow of goods and people is its lifeblood. Passing through the gate, you enter a different world. The streets of Ur are narrow and winding, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast, and they are lined with houses built of sun-dried mud brick, their walls whitewashed to reflect the heat. The houses are packed tightly together, sharing common walls, and their blank facades reveal nothing of the life within. There are no windows facing the street, only heavy wooden doors set into the walls at irregular intervals. This is for privacy and security, but also for comfort. The streets are like ovens in the heat of the day, and the houses are designed to turn inward, to create cool, shaded spaces away from the glare and noise. You can hear, from behind the walls, the sounds of domestic life, the splash of water being poured, the rhythmic thump of a grinding stone, a woman's voice calling to a child. The street beneath your feet is hard-packed earth, smooth from the passage of countless feet, and it is littered with bits of broken pottery, date pits, and the occasional scrap of woven reed matting. As you move deeper into the city, the character of the streets begins to change. In the poorer quarters near the walls, the houses are smaller and more crudely built, some little more than red huts with walls of woven reeds plastered with mud. But as you approach the center, the buildings become larger and more substantial. Here are the homes of the wealthy, the merchants and scribes and temple officials, built around spacious central courtyards with multiple rooms opening off them. You can glimpse through an open doorway the interior of one such house, a courtyard open to the sky, with a small pool or fountain in the center, potted plants arranged along the walls, and doorways leading to cool, dim rooms beyond. The architecture is simple but elegant, designed for function and comfort in a harsh climate. The thick walls provide insulation from the heat, the courtyard allows air to circulate and light to enter, and the flat roofs, accessible by ladder, serve as additional living space where families can sleep on hot summer nights. The social hierarchy of Ur is written in its architecture, visible to anyone who knows how to read the signs. At the bottom are the laborers and the poor, living in cramped quarters with barely enough space to sleep. Above them are the craftsmen and small merchants, the weavers and potters and fishermen, living in modest but respectable homes. Higher still are the scribes and minor officials, the administrators of the temple and palace, who enjoy larger houses and more privacy. And at the very top are the elite, the great merchant families and the priests, who live in sprawling compounds with multiple courtyards, private wells, and even small household shrines. This is a stratified society, rigid in its divisions, and yet there is also a sense of shared identity, a pride in being a citizen of Ur, in belonging to one of the great cities of the world. Everyone, from the lowest laborer to the highest priest, participates in the same religious festivals, worships the same gods, and depends on the same canals for water and the same grain stores for food. And towering over everything, visible from almost any point in the city, is the ziggurat. The sacred precinct of occupies the very heart of the city, a vast walled enclosure that contains not only the ziggurat but also dozens of temples, administrative buildings, workshops and storerooms. This is the domain of Nana, the moon god, the patron deity of and it is the spiritual and economic center of the entire city-state. As you approach the precinct, the streets grow wider and more orderly, and the crowds thicken. Pilgrims come here from all over southern Mesopotamia to make offerings at the god's shrine, and on festival days the precinct is filled with thousands of people, their voices rising in hymns and prayers. But even on an ordinary day, there is a sense of awe and reverence as you pass through the Great Gate and enter the shadow of the ziggurat. The Great Ziggurat of is a monument unlike anything else in the ancient world. A massive artificial mountain built entirely from brick. It rises in 3 distinct tiers, each smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pyramid that climbs nearly 70 feet into the air. The base is enormous, roughly 200 feet on each side, and the entire structure is oriented precisely to the cardinal directions, its corners pointing north, south, east and west. The lowest tier is built from millions of mud bricks, sun-dried and then stacked with almost unimaginable labor, and this core is then encased in a skin of baked brick, fired in kilns until it is as hard as stone. The baked bricks are set in bitumen, a thick black tar that seeps from the ground in certain places and serves as both mortar and waterproofing. The result is a structure of astonishing solidity, built to endure for eternity. 3 monumental staircases lead up the face of the ziggurat, 2 flanking the sides and 1 running straight up the center, and these staircases converge at a great gateway on the first tier. From there, a second staircase leads to the second tier, and finally a third to the summit where the Temple of Nana stands, a small rectangular building with walls of gleaming baked brick. This is the dwelling place of the god, the point where heaven and earth meet, and it is forbidden to all but the highest priests. The people of believe that each night, Nana descends from the heavens and enters his temple, where a sacred meal is prepared for him, and in the morning he ascends once more, bringing light and order to the world. The ziggurat is not a tomb, as the pyramids of Egypt are. It is a bridge, a stairway between the human and the divine. The ziggurat does not stand alone. It is surrounded by a complex of buildings that form the administrative and ritual heart of the city. There are smaller temples dedicated to Ningal, the moon god's consort, and to other deities of the Sumerian pantheon. There are workshops where craftsmen produce the ritual objects needed for worship: bowls and cups of polished stone, incense burners of bronze, statues of gods and kings. There are storerooms filled with offerings, jars of oil and wine, baskets of dates and barley, bolts of woven cloth. And there are the great grain silos, towering structures of baked brick where the temple stores the surplus from the fields, the wealth that allows the city to survive times of drought and famine. The temple is not only a religious institution, but an economic one, the largest employer in the city, controlling vast tracts of farmland and employing hundreds of laborers, scribes and priests. The priesthood of is a powerful and privileged class. They are the intermediaries between the gods and the people, responsible for performing the daily rituals that keep the cosmos in balance. Every morning, the high priest and his assistants ascend the ziggurat to the Temple of Nana, where they wash and dress the statue of the god, present him with offerings of food and drink, and recite the prescribed prayers and hymns. The statue itself is a work of art, carved from precious wood and inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli, and it is treated as if it were a living being, with its own clothing, its own meals, its own schedule. The priests believe, or at least profess to believe, that the god inhabits the statue, that he is present in a real and tangible way, and they care for him with all the devotion of servants tending a living king. The atmosphere within the sacred precinct is heavy with incense, the smoke rising in slow coils from bronze braziers placed at intervals along the courtyards. The scent is rich and resinous, frankincense and myrrh imported from distant lands, mingled with the smell of burning cedar and the faint sweetness of date wine. The walls of the temples are decorated with elaborate friezes, scenes of gods and kings rendered in low relief, and the floors are paved with baked brick worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. There is a sense of order here, of ritual performed with precision, of time measured not in hours but in the cycles of the moon, the rising and setting of the stars. At night, when the moon rises full and bright above the ziggurat, the priests light torches along the staircases, and the entire structure seems to glow, a beacon visible for miles across the dark plain. It is a site of terrible beauty, a reminder of the power of the gods and the fragility of human life. As the days pass and you grow more familiar with Ur, you begin to notice the rhythms of the city, the patterns that govern daily life. The marketplace is the heart of the city's economic activity, a sprawling open area near the main gate where merchants and farmers gather to buy and sell. The market is busiest in the early morning, before the heat of the day becomes unbearable, and it is a place of constant motion and noise. Vendors call out their wares, their voices competing with the bleating of goats and the lowing of cattle. There are stalls selling barley and wheat, dates and figs, fish from the rivers and the marshes, wool and linen cloth, pottery and baskets, bronze tools and copper jewelry. The air is thick with smells, the earthy scent of grain, the sharp tang of fish, the sweetness of honey, the acrid smoke from cooking fires. Trade in Ur is not conducted with coins, as there is no such thing as money in the modern sense. Instead, people barter, exchanging goods for goods, or they use standardized weights of silver as a measure of value. A merchant might sell a bolt of wool for a certain weight of silver, which can then be used to purchase grain or oil. The silver itself is not minted into coins, but kept as small ingots or rings, which are weighed on a balance scale before each transaction. This system requires trust and careful record keeping, and it is here that the scribes of Ur play a crucial role. Seated at small tables in the shade of awnings, they record every significant transaction on clay tablets, using the wedge-shaped script known as cuneiform. The scratch of the reed stylus on wet clay is a constant background sound in the marketplace, as scribes press the marks into the soft surface, creating records that will be dried in the sun and stored in the temple archives. Cuneiform is the world's first writing system, invented by the Sumerians, several centuries before the height of Ur, and it is a tool of immense power. Originally developed to keep track of temple inventories, lists of sheep and jars of oil, it has evolved into a flexible medium capable of recording everything from legal contracts to love poetry. The script is complex, consisting of hundreds of individual signs, each representing a word or a syllable, and learning to read and write it requires years of study. This is the province of the scribes, the educated elite who serve the temple and the palace, and their literacy gives them enormous influence. To be a scribe is to be a person of status, exempt from manual labor, entitled to a share of the temple's wealth. And so families with means send their sons to the scribal schools, where they spend their childhood learning to form the wedge-shaped marks with precision and speed. The marketplace is also a place of human connection, where news is exchanged and friendships are formed. You might see two merchants haggling over the price of a shipment of copper, their voices rising in mock outrage, only to clasp hands and share a cup of beer when the deal is done. You might see a farmer's wife selling eggs from a basket, her young daughter beside her, learning the art of negotiation. You might see a craftsman displaying his wares, bronze knives with bone handles, each one slightly different, each one a small work of art. There is a sense of community here, a feeling that the marketplace is not just a place of commerce but a gathering space, a forum where the life of the city is made visible. The workshops of Ur are clustered in certain quarters of the city, organized by trade. There is a street of metalworkers, where the air rings with the sound of hammers on bronze, and the forges glow red even in the heat of the day. The metalworkers of Ur are skilled artisans, capable of casting complex shapes, of alloying copper and tin to create bronze, of hammering gold into thin sheets that can be inlaid with precious stones. They produce tools and weapons, jewelry and ritual objects, and their work is prized across Mesopotamia. In another quarter, the weavers work at their looms, their fingers moving with practiced speed as they interlace threads of wool and linen. The cloth they produce is soft and durable, dyed in rich colors, reds and blues and yellows extracted from plants and minerals. Some of the finest cloth is reserved for the temple, used to dress the statues of the gods, but most is sold in the marketplace or exported to distant cities. There are potters as well, shaping clay on simple wheels, their hands wet and covered in slip. They produce the everyday vessels of Sumerian life, bowls and jars and cups, all fired in kilns until they are hard and waterproof. The pottery of Ur is functional rather than decorative, plain and sturdy, designed to hold grain and oil and water. And there are jewelers, working with gold and silver, carnelian and lapis lazuli, creating necklaces and earrings, rings and bracelets, objects of beauty that also serve as stores of wealth. The lapis lazuli, A deep blue stone flecked with gold is especially prized, imported from the mountains of Afghanistan, along trade routes that stretch for thousands of miles. To wear lapis is to display one's connection to distant lands, to the networks of exchange that link to the wider world. The sensory experience of the workshops is intense. There is the clang of metal on metal, the hiss of hot bronze being quenched in water, the smell of burning charcoal and molten copper. There is the rhythmic clack of the loom, the soft whisper of thread being pulled through the warp. There is the wet, earthy smell of clay, the acrid smoke of the kiln, the dusty scent of ground minerals used for pigments. And there is the human element, the quiet concentration of the craftsman, the satisfaction of seeing raw materials transformed into finished goods, the pride in work well done. These are not factories in the modern sense, with their division of labor and mechanical efficiency. These are small workshops, often family-run, where skills are passed from father to son, where each object is made by hand, where the craftsman knows the history of every piece he produces. Now imagine stepping away from the noise and bustle of the marketplace, away from the clang of bronze and the calls of vendors, and entering one of the residential quarters of Ur. You pass through a doorway set into a whitewashed wall, and find yourself in the courtyard of a middle-class home, the dwelling of a scribe or a minor merchant. The courtyard is perhaps 15 feet square, open to the sky, and it is the center of all activity in the household. The walls are thick and windowless, providing privacy and insulation, and the rooms of the house open off the courtyard on all four sides. There is a small pool in the center, fed by rainwater when the rains come, and around it are arranged clay pots containing herbs and small flowering plants, an attempt to bring a touch of green into this world of mud and brick. The layout of a Sumerian home is simple but well adapted to the climate. The main living room is usually on the north side of the courtyard, where it receives the least direct sun. Here the family gathers in the evening, sitting on reed mats spread on the floor, sharing a meal prepared by the women of the household. The kitchen is a separate room, with a clay oven built into one corner, and the smell of baking bread often fills the courtyard, mingling with the scent of onions and fish being cooked over a small fire. There are storage rooms for grain and oil, kept in large pottery jars sealed with bitumen to keep out insects and rodents. And there are sleeping quarters, small rooms with raised platforms of mud brick where the family spreads their sleeping mats. On the hottest nights, when even the thick walls cannot keep out the heat, the family sleeps on the roof, climbing up a ladder to the flat surface where they can catch the faint breeze and watch the stars wheel overhead. The family structure in Ur is patriarchal, with the eldest male serving as the head of the household. He owns the property, manages the family's business or trade, and represents the family in legal matters. But the women of the household are far from powerless. They manage the day-to-day operations of the home. They brew the beer that is a staple of the Sumerian diet. They weave cloth for clothing and trade, and they raise the children. Women of wealthy families sometimes engage in business on their own, lending silver at interest or investing in trading ventures. And in the temple hierarchy, there are priestesses who hold positions of considerable authority, serving the goddesses Ningal and Inanna, presiding over rituals that are closed to men. The diet of the average family in Ard is simple but sufficient. Barley is the staple grain, ground into flour and baked into flat loaves of bread, or mixed with water to make a thick porridge. Beer is consumed at nearly every meal, a thick, nutritious beverage brewed from barley and flavored with dates. It is drunk through reed straws to filter out the sediment, and it provides both calories and a mild intoxication that makes the heat and labor of the day more bearable. Fish from the rivers and marshes are a common source of protein, grilled over an open fire or stewed with onions and herbs. Dates are everywhere, eaten fresh or dried, pressed into cakes or fermented into a sweet wine. There is also mutton and goat meat on occasion, though meat is expensive and reserved for special occasions or festivals. Vegetables include onions, leeks and lentils, and there is a variety of fruits, figs and pomegranates, though these are luxuries enjoyed mainly by the wealthy. The rhythm of domestic life is tied to the rhythms of the agricultural year, to the flooding of the rivers and the harvest of the crops. In the spring, when the barley is ripe, the entire city mobilizes for the harvest, with even the urban dwellers going out to the fields to help bring in the grain. It is a time of intense labor, but also of celebration, as the storerooms are filled and the threat of famine recedes for another year. In the summer, when the heat is at its peak and the fields lie fallow, life slows down. People rise before dawn to do their work, then retreat indoors during the worst of the heat, emerging again in the evening when the air begins to cool. And in the winter, when the rains come and the temperature drops, there is a sense of relief, a chance to rest and repair, to mend tools and clothing, to tell stories and strengthen the bonds of family and community. Children in grow up in a world of work and play, of learning by doing. Boys help their fathers in the fields or workshops, learning the skills they will need as adults. Girls help their mothers with cooking and weaving, with fetching water and caring for younger siblings. But there is also time for play, and children can be seen running through the streets, playing with simple toys, clay figurines and balls made of rags, spinning tops and small carts pulled by string. Education, in the formal sense, is reserved for the children of the elite, the boys who will become scribes. They attend the Aduba, the scribal school, where they spend long hours copying texts onto clay tablets, memorizing lists of words and mathematical tables, learning the complex grammar and syntax of Sumerian and Akkadian, the two languages of the educated class. It is tedious work, and the discipline is harsh, with beatings for students who fail to memorize their lessons or who make errors in their writing. But for those who succeed, the rewards are great, a lifetime of secure employment, respect and relative comfort. The courtyard of the house, as evening falls, becomes a place of quiet gathering. The heat of the day has passed, and a faint breeze stirs the air. The family sits together on mats, eating a simple meal of bread and fish, dates and beer. There is conversation, the sharing of news from the marketplace, discussion of plans for the coming days. There is laughter, the teasing of children, the warmth of human connection. And as the stars begin to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky, there is a sense of peace, of being part of something larger, a community that has endured for generations and will, the gods willing, endure for generations more. But beyond the walls of the living, beyond the noise and life of the city, there is another a silent city of the dead. The Royal Cemetery of is one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, a collection of graves that reveals both the wealth and the mystery of Sumerian civilization. The cemetery lies just outside the sacred precinct, and it was in use for several centuries during the early dynastic period, around 2600 to 2500 BCE, several hundred years before the height of the Third Dynasty. The graves were discovered in the 1920s by the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley, whose excavations revealed a world of astonishing beauty and disturbing ritual. The royal tombs are not simple graves but elaborate underground chambers, built of stone and brick, accessed by sloping ramps that descend into the earth. The walls of the chambers are lined with stone, and the floors are paved with brick, creating spaces that were clearly meant to serve as eternal dwelling places for the dead. The bodies of the kings and queens were laid out on wooden biers, dressed in elaborate garments and surrounded by treasures. There were headdresses of gold and lapis lazuli, necklaces of carnelian and agate, ceremonial weapons inlaid with precious metals, bowls and cups of gold and silver, lyres with sound boxes decorated with scenes of myth and legend. The wealth buried with these individuals was staggering, a display of power and status that speaks to the central role of kingship in Sumerian society. But it is not the wealth alone that makes the royal cemetery so remarkable. It is the presence of the attendants, the dozens of men and women who were buried alongside their rulers, apparently willingly accompanying them into the afterlife. In some tombs, as many as 70 individuals were found, arranged in neat rows, dressed in their finest clothing, with cups of clay or metal near their hands. The evidence suggests that they drank poison, perhaps a mixture of opium and some other substance, and lay down to die in the tomb, their bodies positioned carefully by the priests or other officials. There is no sign of violence, no indication of struggle. This was a ritual death, a sacrifice performed in the belief that the king or queen would need servants in the next world, that the bonds of service extended beyond the grave. The most famous of the royal burials is that of Queen Puabi, whose tomb was found intact, untouched by grave robbers. She was buried with a headdress of extraordinary beauty, a complex arrangement of gold leaves and flowers, lapis lazuli beads and carnelian pendants, all woven into her hair. Her body was adorned with necklaces and bracelets, and beside her were placed cosmetic jars, a gaming board and a golden cup. Around her, in the death pit, were the bodies of her attendants, including musicians who had been buried with their lyres, the instruments still clutched in their hands. One of these lyres, known as the Queen's Lyre, is decorated with a bull's head in gold and lapis lazuli, a masterpiece of Sumerian art, and it is now one of the treasures of the British Museum. The discovery of the death pits raises profound questions about Sumerian beliefs and values. What kind of society could demand such sacrifices? What beliefs could make dozens of people willing to die for their ruler? The answers are not entirely clear, but the evidence suggests that the Sumerians believed in an afterlife, a shadowy underworld ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal, where the dead lived a pale, diminished existence. They also believed that the king or queen was not merely a political leader but a sacred figure, a link between the human and divine realms, and that the death of the ruler was a cosmic event that required extraordinary measures. The attendants, by accompanying their lord or lady into death, were ensuring the continuity of the royal household in the next world, and they may have believed that this act of devotion would be rewarded in the afterlife. The objects found in the tombs are not only beautiful but also revealing. There is the Standard of Ur, a wooden box inlaid with shell and lapis lazuli, depicting scenes of war and peace, of soldiers marching into battle, and of banquets where the king and his nobles feast on the spoils of victory. There is the golden helmet of Meskalom Dug, a work of astonishing craftsmanship, hammered from a single sheet of gold and shaped to resemble a wig, complete with individual strands of hair and a carefully rendered knot at the back. There are gaming boards suggesting that the Sumerians enjoyed games of strategy, and there are musical instruments, lyres and harps, indicating the importance of music in religious and social life. All of these objects, now scattered in museums around the world, are fragments of a vanished world, clues to the beliefs and values of a people who lived and died more than 4,000 years ago. Walking through the reconstructed displays of these artifacts, you can almost hear the voices of the dead, the whispered prayers of the priests, the songs of the musicians, the quiet acceptance of the attendants, as they drank the poison and lay down to sleep forever. The royal cemetery is a place of beauty and horror, a reminder that civilizations are built on sacrifices, that the grandeur of the past often rests on foundations of suffering and loss. And yet there is also something deeply human in these graves, a recognition that even in death, the Sumerians sought to preserve the bonds of family and community, to ensure that their rulers would not journey alone into the unknown. At the heart of Ur's power and influence was not the sword but the stylus, not the warrior but the scribe. The scribal schools of Ur, known as Edebus, were institutions of immense importance, training the next generation of administrators, priests, and scholars. These schools were attached to the temples and were supported by the temple's wealth, and they were the preserve of the sons of the elite, though occasionally a talented boy from a lower-class family might be admitted if his potential was recognized. The education of a scribe was long and rigorous, beginning when a boy was perhaps 7 or 8 years old and continuing for a decade or more. The goal was not merely to teach literacy, but to shape the student into a cultivated, disciplined individual capable of serving the state and the gods. The curriculum of the Edeba was demanding. Students began by learning the basic signs of cuneiform, practicing on small clay tablets that could be smoothed and reused. They copied lists of words, simple syllables at first, then more complex terms, arranged by category: trees, animals, metals, stones, professions. These lexical lists were not just vocabulary exercises, but a way of organizing knowledge, of imposing order on the chaos of the world. As the students advanced, they moved on to more complex texts, copying proverbs and hymns, legal formulas, and mathematical problems. They learned to write in both Sumerian, the ancient sacred language, and Akkadian, the Semitic language that was increasingly dominant in everyday speech. And they learned arithmetic, working with a sexagesimal system, a base 60 system that the Sumerians invented and that we still use today when we divide the hour into 60 minutes and the circle into 360 degrees. The physical act of writing on clay is a sensory experience, one that connects the scribe to a tradition stretching back centuries. The clay is soft and damp, cool to the touch, and it smells of earth and water. The stylus is a reed, cut at an angle to create a wedge-shaped tip, and it is held at a precise angle, pressed firmly into the clay to create the marks. Each sign is composed of multiple wedges, some vertical, some horizontal, some diagonal, and the scribe must remember the correct sequence and orientation for hundreds of different signs. It is painstaking work, requiring concentration and control, and errors are common. A sign placed incorrectly can change the meaning of an entire sentence, and so the students are drilled endlessly, copying the same texts over and over, until their hands move automatically, until the shapes of the signs are burned into their muscle memory. The tablets, once inscribed, are left to dry in the sun, the clay hardening slowly until it is almost as durable as stone. Important documents, contracts, and legal texts are baked in a kiln, making them permanent and nearly indestructible. And indeed, it is this permanence that has allowed us, thousands of years later, to read the words of the Sumerians, to glimpse their thoughts and concerns, their fears and hopes. The clay tablets of tens of thousands of them excavated from the ruins, are a vast archive of human experience, recording everything from the mundane details of grain rations to the soaring poetry of hymns to the gods. The genres of Sumerian literature are diverse. There are administrative texts, lists of workers and their rations, inventories of livestock and grain, contracts for the sale of land or the loan of silver. These are the backbone of the archive, the everyday records that kept the economy functioning. But there are also literary texts, works of imagination and devotion. There are hymns to the gods, praising their power and seeking their favor, often with vivid and poetic language. There are myths, stories of creation and flood, of the descent of the goddess Inanna to the underworld, of the hero Gilgamesh and his quest for immortality. There are wisdom texts, collections of proverbs and sayings offering advice on how to live a good and successful life. And there are lamentations, mournful poems that grieve the destruction of cities and the suffering of the people, written in times of war and disaster. The scribes themselves were acutely aware of the power and prestige that literacy conferred. There are texts, written by scribes, that extol the virtues of the scribal profession, that mock the lowly status of other trades. The scribe, one text proclaims, his hand is clean, he need not toil in the fields under the burning sun. He sits in the shade and gives orders, all others serve him. This is of course an exaggeration, but it reflects a genuine pride in the intellectual labor of the scribe, in the mastery of a skill that set him apart from the mass of humanity. And indeed, the scribes did enjoy considerable privilege. They were exempt from military service and from corvée labor, the forced work gangs that built the canals and maintained the walls. They were paid in rations of barley and oil, and they had access to the temple's resources. They were, in a very real sense, the bureaucratic elite of Sumerian society, the men who made the system work. And yet, the life of a scribe was not without its hardships. The training was brutal, and corporal punishment was common. Students who failed to memorize their lessons or who made too many mistakes could expect to be beaten, and the texts themselves refer to the man with the whip, the teacher whose discipline was harsh and unforgiving. The work, too, could be tedious, hour after hour of copying the same formulas, calculating the same sums, recording the same inventories. But for those who persevered, who mastered the script and demonstrated their competence, the rewards were substantial: a life of security and respect, a place in the apparatus of power, a connection to the gods themselves through the sacred texts they copied and preserved. As the centuries passed, grew not only in wealth, but also in political ambition. By the end of the 22nd century BCE, the city had emerged as the dominant power in southern Mesopotamia, and its rulers began to style themselves as kings of a wider realm. The founding figure of this new empire was Ur-Nammu, who came to power around 2112 BCE and established what historians call the Third Dynasty of Ur. Ur-Nammu was a ruler of vision and energy, a man who understood that power rested not only on military might, but also on law, infrastructure, and the perception of divine favor. He embarked on an ambitious program of building and reform, and his legacy would shape the city for generations. Ur-Nammu's most famous achievement is his law code, one of the earliest known legal texts in human history. The code, inscribed on clay tablets and stone steles, set out a series of regulations governing everything from murder and assault to the ownership of slaves, and the penalties for damaging another man's property. The laws are notable for their relative leniency compared to later codes. Rather than prescribing the death penalty for most offenses, Ur-Nammu's code often imposes fines, payments of silver to compensate the victim. If a man cuts off another man's foot, one law states, he shall pay 10 shekels of silver. This principle of monetary compensation, rather than retribution in kind, suggests a society that valued social stability and economic productivity over vengeance. The code also reveals the social stratification of Sumerian society. Different penalties apply depending on the status of the victim and the perpetrator. A crime against a freeman is punished more severely than the same crime against a slave. A nobleman who commits an offense may pay a higher fine than a commoner, reflecting both his greater wealth and his responsibility to uphold the social order. This is not a system of equality before the law, but it is a system of law, a recognition that disputes should be settled according to established rules rather than by violence or the arbitrary whim of the powerful. Beyond the law code, Ur-Nammu was a prolific builder. He repaired and expanded the walls of the city, strengthening its defenses against external threats. He dug new canals and restored old ones, extending the network of irrigation that supported the agriculture of the region. And most importantly, he undertook the construction of the Great Ziggurat, the monument that would become the defining symbol of Ur. The ziggurat was not built in his lifetime alone, but over several generations, with successive kings adding to and refining the structure. But it was Ur-Nammu who laid the foundation, who conceived the vision of a mountain reaching toward the heavens, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Ur-Nammu's successor was his son Shulgi, who ruled for an astonishing 48 years, from approximately 2094 to 2047 BCE. Shulgi was a ruler of a different character, more flamboyant and self-aggrandizing, a king who claimed not only political authority but divine status. He styled himself as the god Shulgi, and he erected statues of himself in the temples where offerings were made to his image as if he were a deity. This claim to divinity was not unique to Shulgi. Other Mesopotamian kings made similar claims, but it represents a significant shift in the ideology of kingship, a blurring of the line between the human and the divine. Shulgi was also a great administrator, and under his rule, the third dynasty of Ur reached the height of its power and efficiency. He reorganized the bureaucracy, creating a highly centralized state in which every aspect of economic life was monitored and controlled by the palace and the temple. The archives from his reign are vast, tens of thousands of clay tablets recording the movement of goods, the assignment of labor, the collection of taxes. There are records of sheep and goats, counted to the last animal, records of grain harvests, down to the last bushel, records of workers, their names and tasks and rations meticulously noted. This was a state that aspired to total knowledge and total control, and while it never fully achieved that goal, the effort itself is impressive. Shulgi also projected military power, leading campaigns against the neighboring regions, subduing the cities of the north and the tribes of the east. He appointed governors to rule these territories, men loyal to him who enforced his will and sent tribute back to Ur. The empire he created was not vast by later standards, but it was the largest and most organized state that Mesopotamia had yet seen, and for a time, it brought peace and prosperity to the land. Trade flourished, with caravans traveling to the mountains of Iran for metal and stone, to the Gulf for pearls and precious woods, to the west for timber and wine. Ur became a cosmopolitan city, a crossroads, where merchants from distant lands met and exchanged goods, where different languages and cultures mingled in the streets and marketplaces. But empires, like all human creations, are fragile, and the third dynasty of Ur, for all its grandeur, contained the seeds of its own destruction. The bureaucratic system, so efficient in theory, was also rigid and inflexible, unable to respond quickly to changing circumstances. The military campaigns, while successful, drained the treasury and created resentment among the conquered peoples. And the very centralization of power, which made the state so strong, also made it vulnerable. If the center weakened, the entire structure could collapse. And collapse it did, though not all at once. The end of the third dynasty came in waves, a slow erosion of power followed by a sudden catastrophic blow. In the years after Shulgi's death, his successors struggled to maintain control. There were rebellions in the provinces, invasions from the east by the Elamites, a powerful people from the mountains of Iran, and incursions from the west by the Amorites, nomadic Semitic tribes who were gradually settling in Mesopotamia. The governors appointed by Shulgi began to act independently, withholding tribute, raising their own armies. The great bureaucratic machine began to break down, as the flow of information and resources to the center slowed and then stopped. The final blow came around the year 2004 BCE, when a coalition of Elamites and other enemies launched a massive assault on Ur. The city's defenses, weakened by years of neglect and internal strife, could not hold. The walls were breached, the gates thrown open, and the enemy poured into the streets. What followed was a sack of terrible violence, a destruction so complete that it left a scar on the Mesopotamian memory. The temples were looted and burned, the ziggurat damaged, the palace destroyed. Many of the inhabitants were killed or taken away into slavery. The king, Ibbi-Sin, the last ruler of the Third Dynasty, was captured and led away in chains, a humiliating end to a dynasty that had claimed divine favor. The destruction of Ur was memorialized in one of the most moving works of Sumerian literature, the Lamentation for Ur, a long poem that mourns the city's fall. The poem is filled with vivid and heartbreaking images. In Ur, no one is left to go about the streets, it says. The judgment of the land has perished. The black-headed people can no longer rest in the fields. The cities have been destroyed. The houses have been turned into ruins. The goddess Ningol, the patron of the city, is depicted as weeping for her people, unable to prevent their suffering. I could not rescue my city from destruction, she laments. I could not save my people from the enemy. The poem is not only a lament for Ur, but a meditation on the fragility of civilization, on the impermanence of human achievements, on the inevitability of decline and fall. And yet, the city did not entirely disappear. After the sack, Ur was gradually rebuilt, and it continued to be inhabited for many centuries, though it never again achieved the power and glory of the Third Dynasty. It became a provincial city, ruled by a succession of foreign dynasties: Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians. The ziggurat was repaired and maintained, and the worship of Nana continued, though the grandeur of the old rituals was diminished. The canals silted up, the fields became less productive, and the population declined. By the time of the Persian Empire, in the 5th century BCE, Ur was a shadow of its former self, and by the early centuries of the Common Era, it was abandoned altogether, its buildings crumbling into dust, its streets reclaimed by the desert. For more than 2,000 years, Ur was forgotten. The name survived in the Bible as Ur of the Chaldees, the birthplace of the patriarch Abraham, but its location was lost, and it became a place of legend rather than history. The great ziggurat was buried under centuries of wind-blown sand, reduced to a shapeless mound, and the memory of the city's greatness faded from the world. It was not until the 19th century, when European explorers and archaeologists began to take an interest in the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, that Ur began to emerge from obscurity. Early travelers, following the accounts of ancient geographers, identified certain mounds in southern Iraq as the probable sites of ancient cities, and they began the slow work of excavation. The most significant work at Ur was carried out in the 1920s and 1930s by Sir Leonard Woolley, a British archaeologist working on behalf of the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. Woolley was a meticulous excavator, and his work at Ur was groundbreaking in its methods and its results. He employed hundreds of local workers, trained them in careful excavation techniques, and kept detailed records of every object and every layer of soil. Over the course of 12 seasons, he uncovered vast areas of the ancient city, including the ziggurat, the sacred precinct, the residential quarters, and most famously, the royal cemetery. Woolley's discoveries captivated the world. The treasures of the royal cemetery, the gold and lapis lazuli, the elaborate headdresses and musical instruments, were displayed in museums and featured in newspapers and magazines. The public was fascinated by the idea of a civilization so ancient and so sophisticated, a civilization that had flourished when Europe was still in the Stone Age. The excavations also provided a wealth of information about Sumerian life, about architecture and urban planning, about religion and ritual, about writing and administration. The thousands of clay tablets found in the ruins were deciphered and translated, revealing the voices of people long dead, their contracts and letters, their hymns and laments. The rediscovery of Ur was not just an archaeological achievement, but a cultural one, a recognition that the roots of Western civilization extended far beyond Greece and Rome, back to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, to the cities of the Sumerians. Ur, along with other Sumerian cities like Uruk and Lagash, became part of the canon of ancient history, studied in schools and universities, celebrated as the birthplace of writing, law, and urban life. And the ziggurat of Ur, partially reconstructed by the Iraqi government in the late 20th century, became a symbol of Iraq's ancient heritage, a monument to a past that predates the nation-states and religions of the modern world. Now let us return to the present, to the Iraqi desert at twilight, where we began. The wind is still moving across the plain, stirring the dust, and the light is fading from the sky. You stand once more on the low rise of earth, and you can see in the distance the shape of the ziggurat, its step tiers rising against the darkening horizon. It is smaller than it once was, damaged by time and war, its baked brick surface pitted and worn. But it is still there, still standing, a testament to the ambition and skill of the people who built it 45 centuries ago. What has Ur given to the world? The answer is both simple and profound. It has given us the idea of the city itself, the concept that human beings can gather in large numbers, organize themselves, and create something greater than the sum of their parts. It has given us writing, the ability to preserve thought and knowledge across time, to speak to the future in a voice that does not fade. It has given us law, the principle that disputes should be settled according to rules rather than force, that justice, however imperfect, is a goal worth pursuing. It has given us the notion of divine kingship, the idea that political authority can be legitimized by appeal to higher powers, an idea that would shape kingdoms and empires for millennia. Ur has also given us a sense of deep time, a recognition that civilizations rise and fall, that the grandest monuments crumble into dust, that the passage of centuries is inexorable. Standing before the ziggurat, you cannot help but feel the weight of history, the accumulated centuries of human effort and suffering, hope and despair. The people who built this monument are gone, their names forgotten, their voices silent. But their work remains a bridge across the chasm of time, connecting us to a world that is both utterly alien and strangely familiar. The ziggurat stands as it has always stood, a mountain built by human hands, a ladder to the heavens. The moon rises above it, the same moon that the priests of Nana worshipped, the same moon that lit the streets of Ur when the city was alive and thriving. The wind moves through the ruins, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and history, and for a moment, if you close your eyes and listen, you can almost hear the voices of the past, the chant of the priests, the calls of the merchants, the laughter of children playing in the streets. And then the moment passes, and there is only silence, and the wind, and the stars. Ur is both a place and an idea, a specific location on the map of Iraq, and a symbol of the human journey from simplicity to complexity, from village to city, from silence to speech. It is a reminder that everything we take for granted, the institutions and technologies that shape our lives, had to be invented, had to be built by people who came before us, who struggled and experimented and failed and tried again. The Sumerians of Ur did not have the benefit of hindsight, did not know that their inventions would endure for thousands of years. They were simply trying to solve the problems of their own time, to organize their society, to feed their people, to honor their gods. And in doing so, they created the foundations of civilization. As you stand in the gathering darkness, the ziggurat fading into shadow, you feel a sense of connection to those ancient builders, to the scribes who scratched their marks into clay, to the priests who climbed the stairs toward the heavens, to the merchants who haggled in the marketplace, to the families who gathered in their courtyards at the end of the day. They lived and died, they loved and grieved, they hoped and feared, just as we do. And though their world is gone, vanished into the dust of millennia, they are not entirely lost. They live on in the objects they left behind, in the words they wrote, in the cities they built. They live on in the very structure of our civilization, in the alphabet we use, in the laws we obey, in the cities we inhabit. And so our story of Ur comes to a close, though the city itself endures, a ghost of brick and memory in the Iraqi desert. Thank you for joining me on this journey across time, for walking with me through the streets of the world's first megacity, for standing with me in the shadow of the ziggurat. The past is a foreign country, but it is also our home, the place where we come from, the foundation on which we stand. May the story of Ur remind you of the depth of human history, of the ingenuity and resilience of our ancestors, of the fragile beauty of the civilizations we build, and the inevitable passage of time. Now let the wind carry you gently back to the present. Let the images of ancient streets and temples fade into the soft darkness. Rest well and dream, if you will, of distant ages, of cities rising from the dust, of voices calling across the centuries. Until we meet again in another time, in another place, sleep peacefully, and know that the echoes of Ur will always remain, whispered on the desert wind, written in the stars.